This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Today you've heard again here at committee the suggestion that the law in Canada compels parliamentarians to introduce MAID for the mentally ill. We heard that also from Ms. Shelley Birnbaum at our last meeting. She said she represented the CBA, the Canadian Bar Association, and she suggested that there was a strong charter of vulnerability if Canada did not expand MAID to include the mentally ill. Do you agree with that assessment, that we face a strong charter of vulnerability if we don't expand MAID?
I fundamentally disagree, and I'm not the only one who disagrees with that. I think many legal scholars, many people in the legal profession disagree. I think it reflects a distorted view of MAID as a quasi-inherently beneficial practice, and as if not having facilitated access within the medical system to it is a greater harm than death. So I think a discriminatory analysis, on the contrary, would focus on existing structural discriminations of persons with disability, particularly what persons with mental illness already face, at intersecting components, the higher risk to women, Indigenous persons, and persons living in poverty. And so I would argue, on the contrary, that adding easier access to death to existing grounds or existing inequality, while we continue to protect others against premature death, because we have to emphasize that it's still in the criminal code, it still protects others, but we will now exclude that.
I want to be very specific. Is there anything in Carter or Truchon or in that Alberta EF decision that would compel Parliament to offer MAID to the mentally ill?
I urge parliamentary committee members to look at the submissions that you received. We submitted something. I think there is nothing in Carter, certainly not in Carter, that explicitly states that we have to legalize it. In fact, the Supreme Court explicitly excluded mental illness from its reasons.
Are there sufficient legal and procedural safeguards in place to safely implement MAID for the mentally ill?
In my view, there are not. So I think the safeguards that we have are easily circumvented. They are already circumvented in the context of Track 2. I would urge committee members to watch, for example, the recent documentary where we see, by Al Jazeera, where we see Rosina Kamis.
Medical Assistance in Dying, or MAID, the government's euthanasia program.
When I first heard about it, I got really excited because I've never been able to do it myself. I've lost track of how many times I've tried to end it.
In just a few years, Canada has gone from banning euthanasia to being one of the most permissive countries in the world for those seeking it. It's prompted a heated debate about whether the country is making it easier for people to die than get the help they need to live.
It's the same government that's giving out MAID that is actually denying people services in a socialized universal healthcare system. I don't actually care enough about you to fix your poverty or try to find ways to advocate for you, but I can end your life.
Receiving MAID in the context of Track 2, in my view, it shows actually that you can drive a truck through some of the requirements that are supposedly protecting people from receiving Track 2 MAID. And I look at the practice guidelines, at the CAMAB educational documents that have been prepared, at the model practice standard, and at the guidelines. I see an overwhelming emphasis on the need to provide access to MAID, even to such extent that, for example, in the CAMAB documents, there is an explanation how you can easily turn Track 1 MAID into a Track 2 MAID into a Track 1 MAID. In other words, even if you're assessed under Track 2, for example, the CAMAB document states specifically that by refusing antibiotics for a serious infection, you can actually turn your Track 2 into Track 1. I would say that's for me symbolic of the way in which our regulatory approach has been in the context of Track 2, and this will apply to the context of mental illness.
In your brief, you said, and I'm quoting, fresh constitutional analysis is indicated and a higher degree of deference is owed. What do you mean by a higher degree of deference?
Very briefly, Professor Lemons.
Well, I think this is very well established by leading constitutional scholars. I would refer here even to the statements by the late Professor Hogg, who explicitly actually changed his opinion and indicated in a more recent publication that basically Parliament was giving leeway to develop a detailed regulatory regime, and the courts have to assess that regulatory regime, respect the lawmaking by Parliament under a strict separation of powers.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, Dr. Green, I want to clarify that you are appearing in your capacity as an individual and not on behalf of the BC Ministry of Health, correct?
We can't hear you. You're muted.
Thank you. Yes, I am absolutely here tonight as an individual practitioner and not behalf of any organization.
You had indicated that with respect to the CAMAP curriculum, that it was first rolled out on August 31st. It's my understanding that there are 8 different modules. How many professionals have been enrolled in Module 7, MAID and mental disorders?
I'm sorry, who's the question for?
It's for Ms. Campbell.
Thank you.
I have that data this evening, but I could provide it.
It has only very recently been rolled out, or may not have been rolled out. Is that correct?
It has been rolled. Module 7 for mental disorders has been rolled out and has occurred in numerous locations. Maybe perhaps Dr. Gubitz has more information on that as well.
Yeah, I once again, I'm sorry, I don't have the specific numbers, but the modules, as they are in the process of being rolled out, require interested practitioners to apply, to register, to go through the online pre-learning and then the facilitated modules. So you are correct. There will be increasing numbers over the coming months who will be involved in the training. But several groups have gone through already.
Thank you for that. What criterion is set out in the CAMAP curriculum with respect to assessing irremediability in the case of mental illness with certainty?
Again, I'm not sure who it's for, but I'd be happy to answer.
Ms. Green, I'm asking, this is a question for CAMAP. I was asking about CAMAP curriculum. I would expect CAMAP would answer.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is being eaten by... Am I losing time? Because they keep... Well, this is ridiculous. What criterion is set out in the CAMAP curriculum with respect to assessing irremediability in the case of mental illness?
So the CAMAP curriculum is quite comprehensive, and each patient is assessed individually using the expertise of people like psychiatrists for those patients. So we would be consulting with them. I'm not a psychiatrist. So if I had that patient, I certainly would be consulting with a psychiatrist around that patient, not just on one condition, but the patient as a whole.
On a case-by-case basis. Is that the guidance?
That's right. Each individual is an individual and has a myriad of conditions, just like we've seen for the past 7 years. Patients with cancer can have mental disorders.
There's no listing of criterion, and here's what you look for to determine irremediability. With certainty, because that was an issue, predicting it with certainty.
I think Mr. Gubitz raised his hands.
Yeah, perhaps I could help, sir. With respect to the curriculum is a case-based curriculum, and it begins with a series of cases which become increasingly more complex as they go through the discussions. Some of the early cases, the person who is experiencing the mental health issue clearly would not qualify for MAID because they did not meet criteria, all the way through to more advanced cases where the clinical course.
But I'm asking, what is the criteria? What is the criteria? And further to that, what science is it based on?
So at the present time, the criteria are based on the ability of the clinician to assess the patient and provide a diagnosis and to provide a prognosis based on their past history, how they've been treated. As Dr. Green mentioned in her remarks, a person who has just been diagnosed with a healthcare problem would not be eligible. A person who had refused to consider various different treatment options would not be eligible. The sorts of patients who would be eligible would be those who have been treated for many years.
What I'm hearing you say is that there are no criterion, that we're back to where we were a year ago with the expert panel report, that this is going to be decided simply on a case-by-case basis. I see the model practice standard.
Thank you, Mr.
There's
Cooper.
no guidance there either. What we have is no guidance.
Thank you, Mr.